Hello, everyone. I'm going to give you all a few minutes to log in before we start. So good evening or good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you're tuning in. Welcome if you're tuning in for the first time. This is the La Maison de Rouge Monday night weekly live broadcast. I am your host, Lucy Sweetkill, one half of the duo that is La Maison de Rouge. A little bit about who we are. LMDR is dedicated to expanding the BDSM experience by discussing, educating, and informing our audiences about the intersections of kink, wellness, sexuality, spirituality, and social activism. We aim to create a safe space for discussing these topics, as well as providing an avenue for our guests to share their stories and experiences. So thank you again for joining us. Tonight, our guest is a fearless, sarcastic, non-monogamous Black femme learning, living, and loving in Philadelphia, making ends meet as an independent erotic laborer, writer, educator, indie event coordinator, and reproductive justice, human rights, and sex work rights advocate. Best known for her viral photo and commentary from the photo project Topless in New York, she's been known to drink the blood of misogynists and will punish anyone in the name of the moon. Published in the likes of Shout Your Abortion, Hustler Magazine, Nasty Volume 2, and Subvrt Magazine, she is now working on her first fiction novel, several short erotica stories, and an upcoming podcast. Please welcome pronoun she, her, Jessa Jordan. Thank you for joining us, Jessa.
Hey. Thank you for having me.
So before we start our questions, I want to kindly inform our audience to please keep their questions to the end when we will have a Q&A. So write your questions down. We will have a Q&A at the end, and please make sure that your questions are respectful and pertaining to this conversation. So questions like, please show us your feet, are not going to go anywhere. We get those a lot. So, well, so Jessa, since this is your first time on our show, our first question for all new guests is your origin story. So how did you get to where you are now? You know, being a sex worker, ProDomme, activist, advocate, those are a lot of amazing things. So how did you get to this place?
Whew. Strap in, everyone. This is a long story.
We're ready for it.
So, I guess the earliest iteration of Jessa Jordan came about in 2011. I started out as a nude model, and I was developing that skill as part of my developing sexuality, really trying to understand who I was as a young woman. And I was in college at the time, so I had kind of like a double life happening. Because even though I was like very outgoing, outspoken amongst my peers, like I was a scholarship recipient, and so I had to kind of keep it under wraps what I was doing on the weekends, different events and different photo shoots and those types of things. So that being said, I actually slowly ended up going into stripping through nude modeling because I met a lot of strippers who were also nude models. Personally, I call like stripping the gateway drug of sex work, because usually people kind of enter there and then they realize that there are so many other different avenues that they can just like start to explore. And yeah, it's just usually a melting pot. So yeah. I got into a club that was like in New Jersey. I've been based in Philly for well over 15 years now. And yeah, I really love dancing. I really love performing. I've been an exhibitionist my entire life. I've never really wanted to wear clothing. So I think an earlier tidbit even is like when I would be running around my house with my mom as like a little baby toddler Jessa. I would be like ripping my like diaper off and stuff because I just didn't want to wear anything.
So confining.
Yeah, it is. Oh my gosh. And like, no shade to people who are into like adult baby fetish, obviously, like, you know, rock your diapers. But for me personally, it's not an interest. And so yeah, like I would just like frolic in the buff as often as I could. And so fast forward, you know, 20 plus years. And I was like, I love school, I love learning. And my background actually was in English lit. And so I also love the idea of being a storyteller.
Yeah.
And the deeper I got into modeling, you know, I realized that like at the time I was doing a huge focus on just like alternative modeling. So that's like a lot of lifestyle looks. Sometimes there's an overlap in like fetish clothing. And so that started to like really take on a life of its own because I really enjoyed that side of the industry. And as I started to do more like fetish tinged modeling, I started to attract more people who are interested in, you know, domination. And so that led me into actually dipping my foot into becoming a dom. And it's really interesting. Like I never thought of myself as being a subservient person, but like I never really considered myself to be that dominant either. Like I am just outgoing and I can be kind of like rambunctious, but it's usually like more quiet also.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think it's like the book nerd, you know, situation, just being very used to being quiet and writing things down and kind of just like hang out in the background. But yeah, so like in becoming someone who was like being introduced to all these things, I was like, well, how can I put my spin on this? How can I start to like sort of figure out what sorts of types of domination I like and like what I can actually do with the very limited resources I have. You know, again, being like a college kid when I'm getting into all of this stuff. So it became just like a lot of foot domination. And I don't know, to this day, like I think that's still like kind of a calling card for me. Like I have a lot of foot subs. And I mean, it helps though that I have like pretty large feet, I guess, for someone my size, because I'm only 5'.
What's your foot size?
I wear a 10. So
wow. I thought I had big feet because I'm not that tall either, and I have an 8.5, 9, and for an Asian girl, that's pretty big. So, but that's like some good foot domination feet right there.
yeah, and like I mean, they're narrow and everything too, so it's kind of like a very interesting, you know, situation, I guess, at the base of my body, and I really enjoyed like mani-pedis and stuff. So like I keep my feet pretty well groomed. So like people tended to like that. And even being in like the strip club, like I would always have like, you know, my toes out and stuff. So it just naturally was like someone I would attract. And so, yeah, like I had always had like a very strong interest in like rubber as well. Like I have a huge latex affinity, and oh my gosh, like it's so funny. I think like one of the first times I saw latex was a Dita Von Teese shoot, you know, back in like, I want to say the early 2000s. And I was just so obsessed with like how glossy it was, how beautiful she looked. And so, yeah, it was like just a very strong obsession from then on out. And The Matrix as well. Another like very strong, like latex, rubber, vinyl sort of like interest. Because I was like, this just looks so fucking rad. Like I can't. And yeah, so once I finally got to wear like my first like latex outfit, I was like, the feel. I want an entire latex wardrobe. Like I need it. So I'm working on that. But yeah, so from there, I just started to become like more comfortable being, you know, involved in all of these different scenes. And once I graduated college, I realized like I didn't really want to join like, you know, the vanilla world and get a 9-to-5 and just go that route. So I continued to model, I continued to dance, and I began touring because that's like one of the ways that people were making money at the time. And it got me to be introduced to so many different people across the country and across Europe, because I was able to go to the UK and France. And yeah, so it's just like, it's been one thing after another as far as like just like pushing myself to do different types of things. And so like I got involved with a shibari artist in Seattle, the dark arts, and those became some of the most like circulated images, because at the time I had a very huge afro, and that was like another like hallmark sort of signature style that I had. Black girl, huge afro, lots of tattoos, like that was my look. And it's very specific, and so it like kind of resonated with a lot of different people. And at that time, you know, like Instagram was kind of just becoming a thing, so I was like trying to build up this platform and just like sharing as much as I could. And so yeah, it like kind of trickled into me sharing more about like my personal life. And that kind of led me into being more open with sharing like my writing work, because at the time like that had really been just limited to either academics or under my Muggle name. So I'd never really crossed into that territory of like sharing my work on a forum as Jessa Jordan. And that was interesting because I think for a while, like being a writer, I'm very like sensitive about, you know, how my work is going to be received. So I think it was also just like one of those things where I'm like, I want to share these thoughts, but like, do I really need to put something so finite about the things that I believe out into the world? And I realized that like, well, if I'm not sharing my views, you know, I'm just allowing other people to speak for me. Especially when it comes to like sex work and stripping and domination. It's like, all of those are things that people have written think pieces about and never like consulted any sex workers. So it's like, let me just sort of try to figure out how I can like get my views out there and my experiences. And so that led to me connecting to first Hustler magazine. And then after that, I worked with Shout Your Abortion. And so Shout Your Abortion came about as I was on tour. I got to kind of explore the Pacific Northwest, and they are still based in Seattle. And so while I was on a trip there, I actually got introduced to the Shout Your Abortion founder, or co-founder, I should say, Amelia Bono. And I got to witness her shooting her first ever video about her abortion story, because at that point it had just been a hashtag that was circulating on Twitter and Facebook. And all people sharing their abortion stories and just speaking up, because the legislation at the time was threatening for the umpteenth time to really overrule Roe versus Wade.
Yeah.
And yeah, like watching her share her story, I was so moved because I had never really kind of processed my own abortion story. And so, you know, I just decided the flick of a switch, like I'm going to talk about this, and I'm going to finally like have that breath of fresh air come into me, where I can like step into my truth and be authentic and not hide this about myself, because I'm not ashamed of it. And, you know, I really want people to understand that like there should be no stigma associated with the choice that you make for yourself and your body.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I just, you know, sat down in her kitchen and delivered my own story, and that ended up resonating with a lot of people as well. Completed that tour, ended up coming back here, and I think the next year I ended up doing a little bit less touring, a little bit less work, and really trying to like regroup and figure out like what I wanted to focus on. And that really came down to dancing, because again, like this was, you know, just my job, and it was how I was like trying to make a living. And at the time that was like the most like stable income that I had as like a stripper. So I was working in a club, and I ended up like getting reached out by a photographer in New York, who was shooting the project Topless in New York. And it actually was like kind of funny how that came about, because I had seen, I think, a couple of like the photos that he had on like Tumblr, and I was like, that's cool, like, you know, more power to these people. And but I kind of was like giving him shit because I was like, well, you're a dude, and like, no offense, but like, this is very male gazy. Like, I don't know that it's having the effect that you want it to, but like, you know, good for you and the people who are shooting it. And he was like, well, like, how can I make it less male gazy? Like, what in your opinion would like kind of challenge that? And so we had that conversation, and I was just like, I don't know, like, don't make it as much about the person's like breasts, you know, like,
Yeah.
it's not like, because I think at the time, like, he was trying to still figure out, you know, the limitations of like what he could get away with. But I was like, yeah, you don't need to have like zoomed in shots of this person's bosom. Like, that's just not necessary. Get full frame, the whole body, the
All
whole
of it.
like, yeah, it's like, and so like the more he started to like go down that route, I was like, okay, like, I feel like I can get behind this. Like, you understand like how this should work. So I ended up shooting with him, and I remember like getting the photos back and being like, okay, these are cool. It was super cold because it was in New York, and we shot in the middle of like, I want to say like late February, early March. And it was like a nice-ish day, but it's still winter in New York. So like maybe 50 degrees outside was the high. And so, yeah, like this one picture though, I was not even realizing at the time that we were shooting, but a person was walking behind me with a stroller, and they actually ended up trying to like sneak and take a picture. And I like had already posted one image from the set, but I was like, I'm gonna post another one, because the original response that I got on like Tumblr and Instagram had been just like, you know, people in various derogatory marks and just being like super weird, about like how this wasn't necessarily like a feminist stance, and like, if I really wanted to protest the way that women's bodies were treated in media and in the world at large, I wouldn't be using my tits outside naked to do it. And so I really wanted to kind of like expand that dialogue. And so the caption that I posted with this photo of me next to this person with a stroller was about what made women's bodies so dangerous, and like why, or whether or not art could be dangerous. I think that's how I worded it. And what specifically made nudity in art so dangerous. And it was like the first time I went viral, and that was like very jarring. Like, to this day, it still has like thousands of views, thousands of like comments, most of which were extremely derogatory. I had a bunch of people writing like, or not writing, but making like YouTube blogs about like whether or not like I was an intelligent person, and if I understood feminism, and, you know, just different things. It was, to this day, one of the wildest things I've ever experienced. But yeah, like, and most of it was because I had chosen the image where the person was pushing a stroller. And I was like, you don't care as much about my consent for this person who's like, yes, I'm walking naked down a street in New York. It's the middle of the day. It's not super busy. There weren't actually that many people around us. But this person's taking a picture of me that I didn't consent to and that I didn't know about. And I found that very interesting. And yeah, I actually like debated with quite a few people before I ended up just like turning off the comments, because I was like, I can't take it. Like, we're now talking about like 1,000+ comments of people just like ragging on me. And like, of course, like my core system and like people that actually either knew me or cared about my work were like super supportive and like very great. But it was a really strange kind of like foray into the rest of the internet. Yeah. And so from there, I don't know, I just began kind of sharing more of my writing work. I'd been published in Hustler to also talk about my abortion story and Roe versus Wade in the Trump administration, under the Trump administration. I've written about like my views as like an anarchist. I've written about just like stripping during the Democratic National Convention when it was here in Philly. And yeah, just really kind of like trying to figure out like how I can share more sex work positive stories that don't always necessarily have to have a political twist, but sex work is pretty inherently political, so it usually takes that direction. Because yeah, I mean, I want to keep people informed and engaged, but I also like it to be entertaining and not too standoffish, because I feel like sometimes when people don't understand a particular topic, like it's already overwhelming. So if you throw too much at them at once, it can be like, so, you know, still trying to reel people in, make it inviting. And so, yeah, so that's kind of continued on into my work with the Inversions group that's here. We're like a pole performance troupe, and we try to do a lot of, you know, promotion of stripping and like pole performance as an art form, and just giving respect to strippers in general for starting it. That also has kind of like led my journey into doing more in terms of actual like pornographic material, because like I said, I started out as just a nude model. I have since gone on to do adult film, and that's been like a really interesting last couple of years. Got to do a lot of collaborations with fetish performers like King Noir and Lance Hart, as well as just like more vanilla stars like Sarah J. And yeah, just kind of like trucking along and just trying to upend the norms of like what people think sex and sex work can look like, and the types of people who actually do it, because we're still running into the same stigma and the same sort of like social distress of people thinking that the average sex worker is someone who is uneducated, you know, drug addicted, and just not making decisions that are safe, which is not the case at all. So yeah, I think that more or less covers like most of my career.
Well, I have a few questions.
Yes, please.
So just confirming, are you getting a little feedback of me? Oh, I think it went away. So we're good. Yeah, there was a little, well, okay. So I think that journey is really amazing. You've kind of tried all these types of sex work. Is there a type of sex work, now that you've kind of really tried a lot of it, is there one that you feel the most connected to? Or is there one that you really want to just continue down the most? Because I find that all the sex work is different, you know. And so for you, what do you like with trying all these? What has been more connected for you?
I think still keeping in the vein of, like one part of work that I forgot about is that I'm also a part of FemDom Philadelphia, which is a dominatrix sort of advocacy group here in Philly. And again, so they're like just interested in fighting stigma, as well as creating mutual aid and more support for sex workers in the tri-state area of Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and New York. So I think because of the types of communities that I've been able to create and find in Philly and at large around the Northeast corridor, I've really like gravitated back and forth between domination, adult film, and stripping. So it's just like those are all my families. Those are where I feel the most comfortable. And I don't know that I could pick one as being like my main favorite over another, but because they are all unique, and they do have their various drawbacks and their various pros. So it's kind of just I like the duality of being able to go freely between all of them.
Yeah. Do you find that going between any of them, there's any issues? Because I know I've heard that before for some, right? Like for those who, an expectation of one over another, especially, as ProDomme, there's power dynamics. You may not necessarily have that when you're stripping in some ways, and, or at least as overtly, and I've also heard that, sometimes consent can be weird while stripping, grabbing, things like that. While domination, it's a little more clearer. And then, of course, filming, it's all structured, right? When you're filming, it's script, it's go, it's stop, it's angling things, which is so like, do you find there's kind of issues moving back and forth sometimes?
I think because I was already such a public figure, I haven't personally had too many like adverse issues with going back and forth between them. Now I can say that individually, like I've had catty interactions with some people, but it's never been on like a hierarchy scale where someone thinks that they're better than me or something like that because of the types of work that I do. So personally for me, no, it's never been really an issue, and I hope to keep it that way.
That's great.
I think too there's like such a strong overlap again between different types of sex workers. Like I do as much advocacy as I can for people who do like full service, because had that background, used to do a bit of sugaring, and it's always so strange to me when people who like are just very stringent and don't participate in those types of sex work are just like not interested in advocating or like supporting people who are in different types of sex work. 'Cause it's like, we're all whores in the eyes of the vanilla world. So like, what difference does it make whether or not you do one type of work over another? It's like, it doesn't abstain you from having done the work in the first place. So I don't know. It's just very strange. And I tend to kind of stay away from any attitudes like that, because not that I want to be in an echo chamber, but I'm like, you're just not a positive person. You're not here to uplift anyone. So you're probably not going to generally be a good friend or a good associate.
Yeah, that's very understandable. So let's rewind a little to your past. You gave us your story of, baby nudie Jessa. Did you find yourself growing up, beyond just the nudity? Did you find yourself attracted to, there's been a commonality amongst a lot of sex workers I talk where they masturbated way early. They started masturbating at like a super early age. It is weirdly a commonality amongst a lot of doms I know. And like your sort of sexual awakening as, your younger self, did you find yourself attracted to these things that now looking back, you're like, this makes a lot of sense,
Absolutely. So again, like I was discussing The Matrix, that came out when I was like 9 years old, eight or 9 years old. And I think I began like masturbating around that same time. So it's kind of like a just very interesting rabbit hole where I remember like in my house, my dad had collections of like these old velvet paintings, which were very like 70s. But they were like of these like very buxom, like beautiful Black women. And I was just like, these are so beautiful. And I would like feel them all the time. So I think that was kind of like my first real like sexual awakening experience where I'm feeling this plush velvet and just like having this like sensual like exchange with this picture of this woman that's naked. And yeah, so it very much became like, all right, well, like, what else can I explore while I'm here by myself right now? So yeah, that's so funny. I haven't talked to enough doms about that, but I'm now wondering of the doms in my circle, like if that's like the commonality as well. Like everyone started masturbating super early. I want to ask
Yeah,
now. I'm very
it,
nosy.
yeah, I've done so many of these interviews, and I'm like, this is interesting. And then, of course, it's always the power dynamics for a lot of doms, at least the power dynamics that they played with at a young age. With all boys and girls, it didn't matter. There was just some sort of power dynamic play. Which a lot of people will look back and be like, oh, that makes sense. But how about, if you're open to discussing your family dynamics? I know that's a big question for many people around, supportive families, supportive just support networks. Was that a hurdle for you, or did you find yourself lucky to have a supportive family around your sex work and around your exhibitionism as well?
So I actually hit the lottery in that regard, I think, because my father actually passed away when I was younger. And so it's been just like my mother and my sister and I. And our family is heavily dominated by women. So there's usually like one male, like cousin, sibling, uncle, or something, like any male person that's been in my family. It's usually only one of them per generation, which I've always found like very strange. But yeah, so it's just a family full of women. And we're talking like every type of personality on the spectrum, and just like so many different like people with different interests. So for me, like I've always just been around like a bunch of strong, opinionated, just like super intelligent, and very independent women. And so in having all of those archetypes to kind of like look to, it's just been very like fortunate and favorable. Like my mom, when I first told her that I was going to start dancing, because I had some hiccups with my financial aid, that's how I got into dancing. I was like, wow, I will literally get kicked out of school if I can't come up with X amount of money in the next couple of like weeks. So gotta figure that out. What's the fastest way I can do that? And I told her, I was like, look, like this is the solution that I've come up with. And I mean, as stereotypical as it is, the college person who's working their way through college at the strip club, I'm like, there's a reason it's kind of the go-to trope and the go-to stereotype. It's like it happens to people. It's very fucking real. And yeah, I mean, she was just like, well, you're already like, pursuing nude modeling and stuff. And I mean, she's always said to me, like, if I had that body, I would have done it too. So more fucking power to you. And it's just like, yes.
That's a dope mother right there. She was like, if I had that body, goddamn, what I would do. Right. So that's great. So you've had, your family has been really supportive in your endeavors, and that hasn't been a tackle for you.
I can say the only time it became a point of contention is that my sister is remarried. She has a new husband, and he's like pretty great. He's wonderful. But her first husband, not so much. And he was actually like a career serviceman in the army. And when he learned that that was the type of life I was pursuing, the type of career path I was going down, he pretty much called me everything but a child of God. And it was very much like, the standard super patriarchal, like just disgusted by anyone wanting to do something like that. Yeah, so that's the one time in my life where someone directly in my family and in my orbit has been vocally like unsupportive. But it never was a problem for my sister. Like, she did not give a single fuck. And I mean, I think that's not a part of why they have divorced, but it's like situations like that, you know, it kind of opened her eyes to the type of person he was. So,
and now he's gone. There you go. Bye. Nobody needs you. So, where are you hoping your career goes now that you've tried all these different avenues? You obviously love so many. You're writing, you're being more vocal with, with your voice and your thoughts, and you're, putting those out there too. Where do you see yourself going, or where do you hope to see yourself going?
I really have grown to appreciate Lola Davina, who is a sex worker who has been published quite a few times. And I've actually been reading Thriving in Sex Work as a form of self-care in the pandemic. And, just like trying to figure out like ultimately like what my goals are. And I'm like, being published in magazines is wonderful. I would love to have, my first book. And ideally, like, I think I would want it to be a memoir. So I've been kind of going down that path. And yeah, I mean, just like really focusing on like what my goals will be with film, and like how much more I want to dedicate to actually being a performer versus like being involved in the production side of it. So things like that, like, I think that is more or less like the direction that I'm heading in, and just trying to figure out like at what velocity I can really go with it at. Because as with all things in our society, like, as long as capitalism exists, I'm going to need a lot of money to fund a lot of my dreams. So I am working on getting that startup capital.
With this pandemic, hopefully we're seeing a light at the end of the tunnel with, vaccinations and things like that. How, obviously your work has changed, right? Dancing is not as available anymore. In-person work, not available. Did you find yourself moving into other lines of sex work that you had a little more control, like obviously doing video work and stuff like that, production work, because of course you can limit who you see. Did you find yourself exploring well, let me back up. How has that changed for you, and what was that like? Like, what were the biggest change, and what was that like for you?
So I can say that I'd already had my toes in a subscriber or subscription platform. So originally, when I was just modeling, I had a platform called Findro. And that sort of like tapered on and off over the years for me, because I've realized that like running a subscription platform is a tremendous amount of work, and I don't always have the mental capacity to continue it. And it really does challenge like your creativity to shoot with either limited space, like if you don't have a large apartment or house, which I have kind of a medium-sized, I guess, on the smaller side, but more of a medium-sized apartment. And but yeah, like, I have actually started my Just for Fans just last year in the middle, or I guess at the beginning of the pandemic. And yeah, I mean, but it's the same sort of story again, where it's like, this is just so much work. And I am, trying to be gentle with myself, because it's like work that I hadn't really been used to. Like, I had to learn video production skills. I had to learn lighting. I had to learn editing. And whereas I'd only been doing like photos for so long, it's like, that's a huge learning curve.
Yeah.
And I did have like a few people who had been like super supportive and like very generous with like helping me kind of learn the ropes. but yeah, it's like still like having to get the motivation to do it yourself. And especially only being able to have like either Skype or Zoom calls where you can ask for someone's help versus them like sitting over your shoulder and just like moving your cursor around for you. It's like very different experience. So that has been kind of like very hard for me to like get used to, as opposed to being able to collaborate with like full on, you know, videography teams and like a makeup artist or, you know, other performers or models. Yeah, just like creating a ton of content that's just of me, it gets daunting. It gets really daunting. You know, trying to keep myself like motivated in doing it has been the biggest kind of challenge, I suppose.
Yeah. I feel like that's been a commonality for those who are used to some sort of in-person work, you know, like doing just content where you're just on your own and all of that. You don't realize how exhausting it is. And, you know, for those who are consumers of it, they don't realize it's not just a single, like, it's not that 3-minute video did not just take 3 minutes. It most probably took like 10 days. Right. And it's so exhausting, and it really just drains your soul.
And not to mention that, because it's not just the video itself and the editing itself, it's the marketing too. It's the constantly having to be on social media, like, which, I mean, how many think pieces have we seen in just the last year about how detrimental to someone's mental health and, you know, just your physical health it can be to be on social media so much. And when you rely on it for your job, it's like, holy fuck.
So true. Like I'm just, when clients are just like, well, it's social media. I was like, do you like being on social media this much? And they're like, no. Well, what do you think that's like for other people?
Yeah, especially when it's like you have, you know, 10 of these little clients who all want your attention at the same time. It's like, I don't have the capacity to have to like, or to want to be able to talk to this many people at once via like text messages or like chat messages or anything like that. It's like hearing that notification is the pain of my existence. So
You start to sweat. You're just like, oh. Yeah, it does mess with people's mental health like no other. I really would say that it really does mess with people's mental health. So I want to open up to questions. You know, I have some of myself that I want to ask you, but I do want to see what we have for some questions. And then I'm just going to put this favorite femdom activity.
Pegging. Absolutely. And if I had to have a close second, probably breath play.
Awesome. We have another good question. Do you have any books, movies, articles that resonated with you around BDSM? Or maybe even in general around, you know, sex work? I think you did mention something recently, but books, movies, articles.
Yes, so Lola Davina had Thriving in Sex Work. She has a few other collections of work about sex work as well. But also Girl 6, which is like a Spike Lee movie that came out in the 90s. It was about a phone sex operator who's a Black woman. And oh my God, that was just like such a phenomenal film. It's very underrated. A lot of people like do not talk about it, which I can't understand because it was great. Very accurate. It wasn't shamey in any way. It was like probably one of the least male gazy pieces of work that Spike Lee has done, in my opinion.
Wow.
So yeah, I would highly recommend it. But like specific to BDSM.
Or because you've been writing erotica, is there any erotica authors that you really like, or erotica stories that you've been really into lately?
really, really awful, but because I've been trying to bang out some of my own, which I want to launch on my website and a few other erotica platforms in the next couple of months, I've been trying to stay away from other authors, so no. Really trying not to like plagiarize anyone's ideas.
Yeah, not to be like influenced.
No. Which sucks. I mean, I'm totally open to other people's like examples, and if anyone has like recommendations, please send them to me after this. But yeah, I've been trying to kind of keep my blinders on.
Cool. That makes complete sense. If you're trying to kind of write on your own, you don't want to be influenced by others, right? We also have, with all that you do you meditate, pray, or have any other methods of relaxation and centering?
I have been doing yoga almost every day. My sister is a certified yoga instructor, and so we will do a FaceTime chat every day. And I've been working on like my flexibility and my splits training. So that's been one thing. But usually my centering is journaling and just like getting all of my excess energy and thoughts out that way, as well as like taking very long, very hot baths.
Yeah, those are always nice. Oh, I'm horrible at splits. I cannot do that. That's, it's funny because I know so many people. You're right when you said there are so many people who started sex work through stripping. I started right away into domination work and stayed into domination work. It was and it's because I'm not an exhibitionist. I kind of feel like you have to be a bit of an exhibitionist and performer to strip. And I am not one of those people by any means. I like to hide in my dungeon and do horrible things to people without like no one else watching.
Yeah.
But I was just like, the idea of like doing splits, like I'm in awe at strippers. Like that athleticism is crazy, like so crazy. My body like hurts looking because I'm just like, I feel like that split hurts so bad. Like I'm watching you and I feel my body in pain. Thinking about it. It's just like, but it is a very big gateway. And I think it's because stripping is a lot more socially acceptable. I mean, I feel like it's become more socially acceptable over the years with the different movies and stuff like that than a lot of other types of sex work. And so I think less people have, I guess, a judgment around it, or it's a little more accessible, and also because it's a lot more legal, right? But we have another good question. Philly BDSM scene compared to NYC scene pre-pandemic. Have you played in both?
Very limited in New York. We were actually talking about this before the live stream started, and yeah, I mean, I'm very, very, very curious about the NYC play scene because I've like hung out with like a ton of like queer folks in New York pretty much since I started like getting up to the city, and yeah, like no one has ever really like had me in a play environment, and I feel very like very heartbroken over this. But even like with like doms that I've met up there, like I am a good acquaintance with Ashley Page. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, we've never had, we talked about it, but it just with schedules never really lining up and like so many things taking place. It's just been very hard to kind of like figure out, when I can actually go and frolic and play with people. So not a ton of experience to compare it, unfortunately. Sorry about that.
How do you like the Philly scene? Because there's a pretty big Philly scene, I find. People don't think so, but I think there is.
There is. There actually were like so many munches happening before the pandemic, and like I'd gone to a couple. I actually met my current partner at like a foot fetish play party, so like that was very interesting. And yeah, like there have been like tons of other just like BDSM adjacent events. I know that that's one of the things that Femdom Philadelphia hopes to like accomplish post pandemic, having more events like people to get acclimated into the community. Because that's one thing that I can say, like even though there is a very large scene, it is still pretty like closed off from like the vanilla world. So like unless you get invited, unless you hear about it on like FetLife or like know someone who's going, they just tag you along. The only real like sort of like scene that has been very open to people has been this one party that was happening called Pleasurecation. They had kind of like a nice mix, but it was supposed to be predominantly a swingers party. But they had like tons of like BDSM professionals and their subs and like people who were just super lifestyle into different things. And I mean, they had like performers of all types. So it was, a very mixed bag of an event. And a lot of people would always go because it was like the first of the month party. And, it would be like their first sort of foray into the scene in that way. And usually had like, enough of a draw to get people to come back. So I really hope that they can continue, post pandemic to just pick up where they left off.
Yeah, that would be great, right? I think everyone's so starved for connection and play. So my question that I wanted to ask is, how would you describe your style as a dom?
Very much a sensual sadist. I am a switch, and usually when it comes to like my dom persona, it's, I don't know, it's very like sweet and like not necessarily nurturing. I wouldn't go that far because I don't get into like mommy dom kind of stuff, but it is very much like, I'm going to talk to you very sweetly, but I'm still going to beat the shit out of you. Like it's very much on that vein. So yeah, because I don't like to do a lot of like, I guess like oral intimidation. Like I don't like to yell.
Yeah. So. I'm not one of those either. They're like, can you yell at me? I'm like, no. When you know I'm upset, you will know. I take my mom's route, which is like a little too quiet and like a stare of death. But you look at someone, you're like, I think you're burning off my skin with that stare. So what are some activities that you don't enjoy? What are your own limits within you as a dom that people shouldn't reach out to you? No judgment, but it's just not activities, arenas that you like to play with.
I always say that I'm completely off limits for age play. I'm extremely disinterested in race play, and adult baby, like it really is just not my forte. But yeah, like heavy bondage, toilet training, sensory deprivation of most kinds. Those are really like my bread and butter, along with pegging. So
yeah, awesome. We have one question, a little advice question. How would you advise a way to find someone with the same kinks for dating? Do you have any dating advice?
Dating is tricky, especially now, with the pandemic. It's like I know that Field is a thing that exists. It's BDSM like dating app, very specific for people who like to play. So that would be like my first recommendation, I suppose, like because at least you're in that vein, and it's a little bit more of like a serious dating interest versus like something like FetLife, which is just open to like all types of cans of worms.
Yeah.
And I mean, to be honest, like Twitter is actually a really great resource because you can usually find people who are at least interested in the same types of kinks and like start the conversation that way. Way more kink friendly, way more like obviously explicit friendly than Instagram. And I just personally don't ever want to say like, you know, slide into someone's DMs. I feel like tweeting is a very nice nudge instead. So
Yeah, some people, like, I think DMs can be, it's interesting, you know, some people are open to it and they'll say it on their social media, right? They'll say like, DM me, blah, blah. So people just read read what the person wants, because there's also so many people that say no DMs please, and then it's just filled with DMs, and then you're like, well, you're not making a good impression at that point, right? We have one last very sweet question, actually, which is also, as someone who else is tattooed, this isn't a serious question. Do you have a favorite tattoo?
Ooh, it's so hard because people ask me this pretty often, and I never know how to respond because I do really like all of my tattoos equally. So my arm is pretty much comprised of a lot of pieces that represent, you know, sort of like my origin story, as you have said. Because it's kind of like my entire life leading up to the time that I turned like 25. And yeah, I mean, it's very random. I don't know how much I can like sort of show. Hold on.
Is there any one that you're hoping to get sometime soon?
It's funny because I was just talking to my partner about this, how like I don't remember what it feels like to get tattooed anymore. Because yeah, like my most recent tattoo was finished in 2018, and it's my chest piece. Which
that's awesome.
Yeah,
that's beautiful.
It's a jackalope.
Yeah, I can see it. It looks really awesome.
There you go. Not
that's
quite
beautiful.
But and it was a cover up because originally I had a quote by Friedrich Nietzsche across my chest, and I was like, wow, get this off of me, please. Back when I was a baby philosopher, it's been a very interesting ride. But yeah, I just decided that I wanted something else because I also just didn't like the way that the tattoo came out. It was like pretty interesting script and like the choice that the artist had taken, because I wanted it completely across my chest, and it was like the artist's interpretation of what that meant and how that could be completed. So yeah, I'm just much more excited about this one. But if I really, really, really had to pick, I do love my Sailor Moon, which is like,
that's awesome. Yeah, I'm a big Sailor Moon fan. I have many of BDSM Sailor Moon shirts. I'm definitely, actually, Sailor Moon and I have the same birthday.
Oh, no fucking way.
Yeah, her birthday is June 30th, and I am June 30th as well. We're both moons. But I've always connected with Sailor Jupiter. She was my girl, you know. I can see food. That. She loves food. Like, I just always loved her. She was always like my jam. So, but Sailor Moon is definitely a love of mine, and quite kinky if people think about it. So So Jessa, please tell us if there are any upcoming projects or things that people should know about. I do want to point out for our audience that if you see below on the screen scrolling by, these are Jessa's website, fan site, Twitter, Instagram as well. So go ahead and follow, sign up, contact. But is there any projects or upcoming things you do want our audience to know before we end today?
Yes. I've been working on a podcast the last few weeks, and it is finally debuting on Friday.
Awesome.
It is a music comedy interview podcast, and I've got a playlist for that. So me and the interviewee every week create a playlist, and that's how I figure out different questions to ask them about a particular topic. I have done a few different episodes. The first one is actually with my sister, and we're going to talk about songs that she uses in her yoga classes, as well as like the yoga practice and fitness and, family and life in general. And yeah, I mean, they're kind of going to go down the rabbit hole. So like I have an episode coming up that's going to be about like grocery shopping, one that's going to be about platonic breakups, anime. So it's really going to be like all over the place. Very, very diverse.
That's so amazing because I actually love creating playlists. And so weirdly, a long time ago, I created a BDSM playlist. It's BDSM on Spotify.
Nice.
And it has almost like 8,000 followers or something. I was very, and so I've given it out. Obviously, it's like what I like to play when I play. But I'm someone who creates a lot of playlists myself. So I have one that I've been working on. It's called Damn You're Beautiful, which is about, it's called Misconnections, Damn You're Beautiful, because it reminds me, they're love songs, but love songs that kind of have to do with like infatuation a little, but it's based off because I grew up in the time of misconnection on Craigslist. And so it's kind of that feeling of like going on to misconnection and maybe finding one that says like, oh, I saw you across on the subway, da da da, damn, you're beautiful. It was always that kind of thing that would come up. So that's what that playlist is about. It's a love song playlist, like the beginning love song playlist. So I think your podcast is going to be really amazing. A lot of people are going to relate to it because playlists are awesome. Yes. So it comes out on Friday, correct?
Yes.
And on Apple?
Right now, I'm still trying to get it on most of the major platforms. So it's going to be released through Buzzsprout. And, hopefully in a couple of weeks, we won't have to worry about this many hiccups. But like, that's actually what delayed it. It was supposed to be out last month. And yeah, I think with everything happening with the pandemic, people are just like slacking on allowing my playlist to be on platforms. So...
So hopefully it comes out this Friday. For those of you who would like to support us at La Maison de Rouge and our broadcasts, which Dia and I do out of the love of our hearts, we do not get paid for these. If you look down below, we have a Patreon. Our Patreon goes to supporting not only our broadcast, but it goes to supporting our play space. And there are membership, rewards for being a member. So you do get something in return. So go ahead and check it out. I want to say thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you, Jessa, for being an amazing guest and telling us your story. And we look forward to checking out your upcoming podcasts. So thank you for joining us so much.
Thank you, and have a wonderful Monday night. Everyone stay safe. And thank you again for sharing the space with us. It really means a lot.
Awesome. Bye, everyone.
Bye.